director of the Seattle Information Technology Department. His background includes IT strategic leadership in higher education, libraries, and local government sectors. He has led program teams in areas such as digital equity, inclusion, web application development, privacy and accessibility, and smart cities and civic technologies, and more. We have Tom, who's been with Inquisio for the last year and a half, lending his background in local government processes and workflows to develop a tool that helps local governments integrate AI into their agencies. As a career government employee, Tom picked up software development as a COVID hobby, going on to attend UW's Tacoma's graduate certificate in software development program, then quickly gravitating towards AI and machine learning. Tom previously served 2 terms on Puyallup City Council and as deputy mayor. By day, Tom works as a policy analyst for the Pierce County Council, focusing mostly on economic infrastructure and workforce development. MJ is the IT manager, enterprise applications and GIS in the Information Technology Department for the city of Kirkland. She is a dedicated leader in the IT industry who has defied conventional expectations through resilience and determination. Despite dropping out of high school, MJ took control of her future by earning her GED and embarking on a career path that would eventually guide her to a leadership position. MJ then advanced her career and began first true leadership role as senior manager in global IT operations, where she led a global customer command center and then the international traffic and operations team. After years in the private sector, MJ decided to pursue a career in the public sector and took a position as an IT supervisor at the city of Kirkland. MJ was promoted to an IT manager within 15 months of starting at the city of Kirkland and now oversees 2 IT divisions. Jonathan is an attorney with ACLU Washington, whose goal is to address systemic racial and economic inequities facing his community. Prior to joining the ACLU, he worked as a human rights attorney at Columbia Legal Services, a public defender in King County, Washington, and a death penalty appellate attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative. He grew up in Texas and is a graduate of the University of Texas at San Antonio and Harvard Law. Sabra was named one of the top doers, dreamers, and drivers of 2024 for Government Technology Magazine. Currently serves as the Chief Information Officer for the City of Bellevue. She has spent more than 20 years in government roles, often at the intersection of technology, innovation, data, communications, engagement, and transparency. She is passionate about using civic technology to support community engagement, drive efficient government, and connect communities. Prior to her role in Bellevue, she led digital communications for the city of Seattle and web, social media, digital communications, and open data efforts for King County. She is a BA from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Washington. Jim, did you want to go ahead and take it away?
Yes, I do. All right. Get my sharing window up here. Worked so well in practice. There we go. Okay, does this work? Good. All right. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Really excited about this topic, but I'm already worried about running long with my part here. So I'm just going to jump right in. And thank you for that warm introduction, Rebecca. Few points here about the Seattle Information Technology Department here in the city of Seattle. So we are the consolidated or centralized IT department for the city of Seattle. We serve over 13,000 city employees. I'm not going to drain the slide, but I do want to call out one important part of this slide, which is that we have in our charter the authority to establish city policy for anything related to AI. And I'm only mentioning this because as I've presented this material before, I'm often asked, well, who asked you to set this AI policy and how did you go about getting it approved? And the answer is no one. We saw it was necessary. And my slide deck is acting on its own here. We saw that it was necessary and we initiated the process. So it's also important to note that we also set the procurement rules for IT purchases in the city, which also gives us some leverage to help maintain some control over what comes into our environment and how it's used and operated. So I realized that that specific authority varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So I thought that I would set the stage with just how things work in Seattle for the context of my presentation. So like many other organizations, we became aware of so-called generative AI in late 2022. All right, anybody know how to stop slide timings? Got it, I think. In late 2022, when a very consumer-friendly version of OpenAI's ChatGPT was launched and received breathless media attention. We started receiving inquiries from city employees about this. Can they use it? How does it work? You know, what rules do they have to follow? And after some initial analysis and review of the available literature, we issued a provisional or a stopgap policy that really just mainly advised potential city employee users of this of technology of the existing policies that might apply to the use of this technology. And we advise them to exercise caution and to make sure that their uses of the technology were limited. So you know, because this was an emerging and an evolving field. So we then took an approach that worked pretty well for us back in around 2015 when the city developed our privacy policy. So we formed an advisory group to help us develop the final AI policy. We tapped into researchers at the University of Washington, members of our community technology advisory board, and independent and other organizationally affiliated AI researchers from the Seattle area. And this group issued a report with recommendations that we turned into our generative AI policy, which was issued last October. At that same time, we released a set of AI principles that I will address here in a moment. So during this time, we also collaborated on two national efforts. The Metro Lab Network is an organization that facilitates partnerships between city governments and research institutions. I was one of 5 co-chairs of their AI task force, along with representatives from universities, nonprofits, and industry. And the task force produced a playbook for cities that included sample policy language and other materials. Similarly, the city of San Jose formed an AI coalition that engaged over 100 cities. And they focused primarily on procurement and contracting for AI technologies, as well as vendor assessments, among other things. Materials from both of these efforts are available freely and intended to be shared and disseminated and mixed and folded and spindled and mutilated by other city governments to serve their purposes. And as a follow-up to this, I'll provide some links. So first and foremost, we spent a lot of time seeking to answer the question, what is generative AI? And specifically, how does it materially differ from other forms of technology such that we need to be spending all of this time and effort on it? And so the primary differentiator in our definition is that this is a technology that can be used to produce new content. So unlike other technology that exists to help humans be more productive and efficient by doing things that we can do only much faster, generative AI is novel in the sense that it produces new outputs and operates in a way that is largely opaque to the operator, and in many cases, even to the developer, and that its capabilities are constantly changing. So, you know, one thing to realize about it, or one thing that may serve to differ it from traditional technologies is you can put the same inputs into ChatGPT or other generative tools, and it will produce different outputs depending on, you know, certain conditions or you know, how it's feeling that day. So imagine if you're using Microsoft Excel and, you know, having it add or sum up a list of numbers and it keeps giving you different responses. It's just two different technologies. One is more procedural and formal, and generative AI is more probabilistic and can vary. So that was, I would say, the key differentiator, and our risk assessments flowed out of that. There's a lot of other differences too that I'll get into, but that was our main one. So I mentioned that our policy is based on a set of principles, and our work with our community and our research advisors helped us settle these principles, which are very much in alignment with the city's stated values and other priorities. We thought that this was a good approach. It worked pretty well for our privacy policy that was developed about almost 10 years ago at this point. And it also helps to ground what we're saying and what we're directing people to do in language and in principles and values that are already familiar to most city employees. And indeed, most city employees and city departments are already committed to these same values and principles. So setting that groundwork and reassuring people that this isn't just the big bad IT department telling you what you can and can't do because we're like technical nerds. It's because we all share these common values and principles that we are trying to promote as part of our work as city officials. So we didn't want the policy then, therefore, to be locked into a series of thou shalts and thou shalt nots that needed to constantly change because the nature of the technology was so much in flux. So the two of the principles that I'll call out specifically here, just for brevity, transparency and accountability is a key one. This one is really baked into the DNA of everything that we do in the IT department and in most city departments. And it really describes our efforts and underpins our efforts, for example, to publish open data, to respond promptly to public records requests, to protect the city's or to protect the public's data through our privacy policy. And I think most people in the city generally view this as a duty that governments share information with their constituents in an open manner. So most of the directives in our policy link back up to this principle in particular. And then secondly, I'll call out our principle around reducing bias and harm. This is very much linked to the city's commitment to racial equity and social justice. And in IT, ensuring when we develop solutions and release products that we are not, that nothing in those products reify historical inequities, discriminate against members of protected classes or against vulnerable populations. And because AI systems are trained somewhat indiscriminately on data that may reflect social inequities and biases, it's a major concern that these systems may be replicating or regurgitating those biases in their outputs. So those are two principles that I feel very strongly about and that form the basis of our policy, among others. So in addition, I mean, what good is a policy if there aren't thou shalts and thou shalt nots, right? So in addition to those principles, we actually do have some policy around this. That includes, among other things, directing staff to take action to attribute the outputs of generative AI products and disclose the prompts that are used to produce those outputs. Specifically around bias and harm reduction, we employ something called a racial equity toolkit that we apply to all IT projects. It's a fairly open-ended procedural way of inquiring about potential underpinning biases and ways in which a product may be interpreted differently by different populations. So that's already baked into our processes here in the city. And so our policy directs that, you know, just like anything else, the departments need to complete a racial equity toolkit in collaboration with their race and social justice advisor before publishing anything or or releasing anything into the public using AI. We also prohibit people from entering sensitive or confidential data into AI systems. And I specifically want to call out, I guess, one element that I don't see in a lot of government policies that I've read, and that is a reminder that AI prompts and outputs may be considered a public record if they're used as part of a decision-making process or if they otherwise meet your jurisdiction's definition of a record. So even under normal circumstances in our world, under the Washington Public Records Act, determining what needs to be saved, how to save it, what can be deleted, how to retrieve responsive records, right, is a huge challenge. And when we're acquiring technology products and services in general, we tend to favor those that have some mechanisms to aid that ecosystem of public record and public disclosure. And AI tools are just simply not yet there. They're just not mature enough in many cases to factor in specific government needs. And this is not a theoretical concern. We've received 2 broad requests already, one of which we got last Monday, like 2 days ago, for all prompts and outputs from generative AI systems used by city employees. And it's proving to be very challenging to track that down and to get that information to be responsive and to review the information for redaction. So that's just something I wanted to highlight. It's something that our policy directs people do, but you know, it's remains to be an unsolved problem. We have dipped our toes into a few projects. So I'll speak to at least one of them here in particular. We received a request from our Office of Police Accountability that they want to add retrieval information to their police reports, police accountability reports that are published as thousands of independent individual PDF documents on our website. They wanted to allow members of the public to search those records, not just by keywords or phrases, but to actually ask questions like, how many officer-involved shootings have there been in Council District 3 since 2013, right? It's just an example. So we posed this problem to 3 major AI companies who all said they could do it. And spoiler alert, they didn't. So what we ended up getting were variations of search engines that took natural language queries, parsed them out, and then returned a list of documents that seemed relevant to the query. Didn't exactly process or answer or synthesize information in the way that we had been told that it could. It really functioned no better than what you could get with a standard search engine. So obviously these technologies are ever and constantly evolving. We do plan to revisit this use case, but it did tell us that our dream of providing the service to the public without having to spend the effort on restructuring and revising the data in these reports, essentially taking them out of an unstructured document set into a structured database, may be a bit pie in the sky. We may actually have to do some unplanned and unbudgeted work on the data in these documents in order to achieve the outcomes that we want to have for our public. So next steps. Oh, I should say that we are experiencing much better, we are having better experiences with pilots that are leveraging generative AI's capabilities to actually generate text as opposed to trying to search information or do something that sometimes the technologies are promoted or marketed as being able to do and maybe not yet capable of. So we are having success with some other pilots. Okay, next steps. So our policy right now covers generative AI. We are developing a general AI policy that the generative AI work will be a subset of. We have implemented an AI risk review to an existing gauntlet of technical reviews that we do for any acquisition of new IT products or services. We are requiring vendors that either do or claim to have incorporated AI into their products to fill out an AI fact sheet that gives us some information about how that works and what we can expect from it and how they handle change and how they handle customer data, for example. And we are setting about to require that our customers who are implementing AI solutions or when we're helping implement AI solutions, that they create evaluation plans and impact reports for certain high-risk cases. And by high risk, we mean anything involving consequential decision-making, any decision-making that might be related to life and safety or criminal justice or financial impacts on the public or business impacts, employment impacts. Those are cases that where the risk levels are high and are acute enough that we want to make sure that there are mitigation plans in place for mitigating those risks. And then anything that engages with the public, anything that delivers public information to people, we consider a high risk use case given the nature of the technology. So we're working with partners at the US Digital Response, as well as a couple city departments, to build a reusable rubric to analyze and determine the accuracy, the resilience, the level of bias, and the outputs that these products produce. And by resilience, I mean their resilience to being manipulated by creative prompt engineering, which is another risk factor that we're sensitive to. We're also prohibiting certain use cases. This is a draft, so this is not yet final. We are still in negotiation with a few of our departments around the language here and around what use cases we are saying the city will just not engage in with AI technology. You know, we are using AI to help identify bias and concerns in job postings, for example, but we are saying that we will not use it in actually making decisions about hiring. And then deep fakes, that's of course the use of AI to manipulate, to either create or manipulate images with the purposes to deceive the public. So we have some work to do on our definitions here, but we are working toward establishing some no-go areas for the use of AI. And the reason, you know, you might ask, well, why are we so concerned about this? What true harms are there out there? And, you know, why are we spending so much time and effort on this? Well, number one, you know, there are some inherent limitations to these large language models and AI use cases. You know, a few weeks ago, there was a viral example out on the socials that ChatGPT cannot accurately count the number of R's in the word strawberry. And in fact, it will argue with you about it if you try to correct it. The reason for doing this is that LLMs, despite some of the language that's used to describe them, are not intelligent. They don't understand words like we do. They are recognizing patterns in prompts and comparing that to vast amounts of text, and they're generating and predicting the most likely response in the form of a next word or a sentence, and then they are presenting that in very confident language as they are programmed to do. So, you know, this isn't, going back to use my example of Excel, you know, this isn't a situation where if you ask Excel to add 3 + 3, you will expect it to say 6 100% of the time. And if it doesn't, you've identified a bug that can be fixed. These systems don't work like that. And there are therefore use cases that they are not good at. Another thing is, you know, we don't want to see the name Seattle in headlines such as this. So earlier this year, New York City released a chatbot that reporters were gleeful to discover was actually telling people incorrect and in some cases illegal information. So we don't want, for example, the Seattle chatbot, if we ever release it, to tell people it's okay to burn down your neighbor's house if you want to build a garage there, for example. And New York City has mitigated this by putting a disclaimer up in front of its use saying you can't trust the information that this bot provides, which leads me to wonder, well, then why do you even need it? Right? What's really the value added here if you have to tell people don't believe what the bot is telling you? And then finally, you know, every day it seems I find research that is cautionary in specific circumstances. So this was just released last week. It's a report from the Center for Democracy and Technology on they used various publicly accessible chatbots to determine the quality and integrity of information related to voting with a disability. And you can see the results. You know, very concerning rates of inaccuracy. Every single model they tested hallucinated, made something up, including a law or an organization that didn't exist. And they determined in their methodological framework that about 1/4 of the responses from the chatbots could have dissuaded, impeded, or prevented a user who was simply seeking information from voting. So another cautionary tale to be very, very careful about what circumstances to deploy this technology in. So in conclusion, I think we're seeing a growing awareness that AI and LLMs are not general purpose or casual use technology as they might be marketed to appear. And that we all need to be very diligent and do the work to define what are acceptable use cases. Specifically, there is continued concern about the accuracy and the appropriateness of generated content, and the level of effort to assess and correct it. We were pitched a solution by a company that was touting the fact that their AI generated responses were footnoted and had citations so that we could fact check and double check the accuracy, which sounds like us doing a lot of work for something that is supposed to do work for us. So I don't know that that was necessarily the selling point that the vendor thought that it was. It's better than not citing sources, but it still means that in order to have the human in the loop, in order to do the fact checking of AI generated output, you have to budget in for the fact that somebody has to do that. And that is particularly important if you're building a solution that to avoid disproportional impacts on vulnerable or marginalized populations, which are a lot of the use cases that we're hearing people in the city are interested in. Things like language translation, things like summarizing complex texts. Think about the constituents who would be likely to use that or to need that. Sounds like a great thing if it's actually accurate and can be trusted. So again, just another cautionary tale there. I didn't really talk about this much, but we are concerned about the exploitation of these language models, the fact that they are already starting to feed on themselves, meaning that the data that's entering into training models is actually AI generated data in some cases. And then not to mention that there are sometimes, and we have seen explicit attempts to introduce poor quality or even bad data into models in order to trick the models into malicious ends. There's a concern about industry consolidation and volatility. These systems are extremely expensive to maintain, to build and to maintain. They are really, it's only capable in the hands of a few large companies who have yet to find a path to profitability. So just something to be mindful of is to realize that AI, even the AI that's present in some of the smaller products and services, may be derived or based on some of these larger models that are in the hands of a very few number of companies. And then finally, as I mentioned, these are expensive systems to run, and compute power is part of one of the reasons they're expensive. And compute power in data centers also has a concerning impact on the environment. So if you are part of a city government, part of a jurisdiction or an agency that has stated environmental goals, or you're working for an elected official who is serious about the environment, just be mindful of the potential optics around adopting AI solutions in that environment, because there definitely are some public concerns about the effect of these technologies on the environment. And that is my last slide. So thank you very much. I didn't have the Q&A up, so I'll make sure to check that. And I have some links that I will share when we're done, and I will try to figure out how to stop sharing. There we go. All right. Thank you.
Tom, you're next if you want to go ahead and share.
Great, thank you. I was waiting for the cue there. Let me go ahead and bring this up. Okay. Is everybody seeing my screen? Got it? Am I right in the middle, or did I end up on the side like I was supposed to?
You're not in it at all.
I'm not in it at all, huh?
No, but we can see your presentation.
Well, hey, that's just as good. Who wants to look at this mug anyway? All right. Okay, let's go to that. I think that's that one there. It's that one there. There we go. Now I got it. Okay. There we go. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. The Mac doesn't always work well with the layouts on some of these formats compared to everything else. Thank you. I was saying earlier, yeah, my name is Tom Swanson, and I do some weird AI magic stuff with a scrappy little local tech startup here that we have called Inquisio AI, that some of us government employees got together and Really we started working towards helping local governments leverage these emerging AI and ML technologies, really to make the goal to make government more, more efficient, find day-to-day workflow productivities that, we saw that we could incorporate in our day-to-day routines, and we thought would be valuable in other places too. Clearly, yeah, as a career, as a former elected and a career, government guy, this is something near and dear to my heart. And I'm assuming because, I saw a lot of .gov emails on the attendee list here that, you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't also interested in leveraging these tools to find efficiencies and improvements in your day-to-day workflows. I really don't need to spend time on that. I think Jim actually covered this pretty good. I think I would maybe highlight is, if you think about right now, there's a big marketing component to the term AI. A lot of times, really not the generative AI people are thinking about. But for the most part, it was covered earlier talking about generative AI. That's the concern where people are talking about. But there are kind of other tiers to this. AI kind of being a big umbrella term that encompasses machine learning, deep learning, other things you hear, but these are usually used interchangeably publicly. But really, the concern is that generative AI and the creation of new content based on predictive algorithms. That's really the hot topic right now. My initial thought with the presentation was I was going to try to come here and answer for everybody how artificial intelligence will impact our local economy. After looking into this, I realized I actually have no clue how AI is going to impact our local economy. But in my defense, apparently at this point, like neither does anybody else. So when lack of knowledge exists, building frameworks to understand things in the future is maybe an approach to take. Any information I did give you today is probably going to be outdated in 2 months anyway. So I've constructed some slides. Hopefully we can kind of build some frameworks of understanding to where as new information comes in on these technologies, we have a baseline that we can then kind of evaluate that against. Looking at the economic impacts, like I said, they're the researching and summarizing the studies, they're kind of all over the board, but I can put those in kind of two basic kind of perspectives, if you will. There's kind of the optimistic perspective. You can see that this is going to be the next great 20 years of economic activity for all of us. Millions of jobs created, innovations and efficiencies, the democratization of information and services down line. There's a more pessimistic approach when we talk about massive market disruptions. I'm sure you've heard the different numbers between a third and half of all jobs are going to get taken over by AI. There's also the quip of, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody better at AI than you is going to take your job. That's a common reframe out there. What was touched on definitely earlier, the definitely ethical and social risks. Is this yet? We already have a massive digital divide in this country. Is this just another case of the rich are going to get richer, the poor are going to fall farther behind? How does a kid who barely has access to a computer compete with somebody whose resume or his college applications are being put together by a large language model? I mean, how is that even a reasonable competition? So again, those are all kind of the thing I would highlight on a lot of these on these two perspectives. You will note they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. We could have things happening in the optimistic category in one area and having things happening in the pessimistic category in the same area. So these impacts, what impacts Puyallup may not impact Tacoma the same. What impacts Bellevue may not have the same impacts in Seattle. You could divide Seattle into sub-communities of how, some of these different economic impacts, may affect the SoDo district versus Capitol Hill. But yeah, again, these are just kind of to build a framework of understanding. These are just kind of the topics I've kind of identified in a lot of this literature that we can maybe think about, and as new information is coming forward, we can kind of evaluate it in this kind of thought process. Specifically to local leaders, and especially those working in government. Again, I kind of divided this up into two buckets. You're in a position of leadership within your municipal government. Think about your role as a supervisor of employees who interact with the public. There's a whole series of kind of concerns, and opportunities. We should look at both sides of that coin related to these new technologies. Again, Jim touched on so many of these. I can probably blow through this slide, but I would highlight the right side column. There's also another role that even if you're not an elected, you are a community leader when you reach a certain point in government. Joe and Jane Lunchpail out there, they look to you as an opinion setter. They respect your opinion, and how some of these things that may not be subject to direct government regulation, we all still have a very important role in those, especially in the area of the ethical and responsible uses, and talking about some of these issues of access and equity, as these technologies. There's a whole other debate of whether these technologies are inevitable or not. That kind of becomes more one-sided as time goes on, but they are here. They are being used. I don't know that I would throw one way or the other saying they're inevitable, but these are issues that don't appear to be going away anytime in the near future, and also opportunities that we can either make the most of, or we can just deal with the negatives of. I did want to touch on real quick, and this is more shifting into economic and job opportunities in local communities. Full disclosure, this is going to be a gross oversimplification of highly technical concepts. But again, just as far as thinking about this as a framework to understand things, one way to think about generative AI is to really look at the process and workflow of how these models work. And in that, we can kind of see where local small business and job opportunities may sit within that workflow process. The blue diagram I put up here again, there's a lot of architectures of how these things are built. This is just a very general one, very generic, of how a Gen AI application works. So you go to your whatever terminal you prefer, you put in there, please rewrite green eggs and ham in Klingon, and magically a few seconds later, there it is. How does that actually happen? It starts with a data source, and these are very massive data sources that was discussed earlier. It's billions of data points in the case of of ChatGPT or some of these other models, the back-end data sources for them. That data that again can come from images, can come from videos, can come from massive amounts of text. It is then embedded into a vector database, which sounds like a really fancy thing. But when I say embedded, that's turning, think of anything that can be represented as numbers. That is an embedding. An embedding is a really long list of numbers. That's it. Anything that can be represented as a long list of numbers can be embedded into a data model. A vector database is just different from a regular database in that it doesn't work off like tables and primary keys linking other tables through foreign keys to link data like that. It's a highly dimensional space. The example that's shown up there's a cube is 3 dimensionals, but really we're talking about hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of dimensions in this mythical space that we can't even comprehend. But what it's doing is it's clustering those vectors in different spots of that highly dimensional space. And that's how the large language model, you see there, trains off that and knows that, cat is going to be a similar distance from dog as kitten is to puppy. And that's how those relationships and those clusters form, and it's able to make those predictions. Real quick, I put that dotted orange line on there to kind of think about this conceptually. Getting back to thinking of a framework of where your business and your growth opportunities and maybe your job opportunities are. Again, those data sources, the vector databases, the large language models, these are all, think big tech, maybe medium-sized tech. Google is making these. it's not Twitter, X. X has Grok. You have OpenAI. These are highly capitalized companies, multi-billion-dollar ventures. That's where those kind of that work is being done. On the other side of the dotted line, where you get into your applications, this is really more where your local developer, small business opportunities are on the right-hand side there. Through the use of APIs, which are application program interfaces, a local developer can build to a niche problem or a specific tasking, not generalized, for local solutions, whether it's within your organization, whether it's maybe a local sector, business sector. They can build tools specifically for those, and through those APIs link to use the engine on the back end to power their specific task going through. So yeah, if you're thinking about, where are we going to get jobs out of these new technologies? Where are we going to get our new startup companies? It's going to be in that development of the applications. Jim talked about that they were working with vendors to develop some applications. Those vendors aren't building their own large language models. That's not what they're doing. They're using APIs to tap into those. Those are the big tools. Much like they're using cloud computing resources. We're not having massive server farms anymore. Similar concept going forward. So as you think about your local economy and your jurisdictions and where the opportunities may be, think about it. And those are going to be small startups. They're gonna start in garages. They're gonna be 3 or 4 people who are maybe working for a tech company, maybe not working for a tech company, that have an idea, and they're gonna run from there. And maybe they turn out to be the next 300-400 employee company in your town. Okay. The diagram on the left here is a very common one you've probably seen at some point in time in your travels. It kind of shows how you can take information and kind of put it in 4 quadrants, and kind of relate things through there. Famously, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld once very publicly and very inarticulately attempted to explain this diagram. You're getting ready for an AARP card if you remember that incident. But I may follow after his fate today and have the same tragic attempt to explain this. But again, starting with our orange line, going across, everything above that orange line, when you think about, is information that we are highly aware of. It's either in things that we already know as facts, or it's questions we know to ask to move that information into facts. Humans are currently pretty good in that area, those 2 quadrants. AI at best will probably operate as maybe an improvement to Google, maybe not an improvement to Google in those areas. Below that line, again, as far as building kind of a framework for understanding where our opportunities might be, below that line is where things maybe get interesting and where there are maybe some opportunities to find improvements. You always see the famed question there, what is an unknown known? Something that you don't know, it. It's kind of an odd phraseology, but think about that as the unread books on your shelf, right? You have acquired this knowledge. You just haven't taken the time to read the book to internalize it and process it yet. When we talk about an unknown known, that's it. Well, all of our organizations have very similar things. We have collected massive amounts of data that are sitting in our repositories, are sitting in databases. All of this data could be put to various uses as far as improving the services we offer, as far as improving our individual workflows, being able to better predict where services need to be distributed, being able to predict, what communities maybe aren't receiving adequate services that they need. That is where, if you think about just pure processing of information, the pure power to process this information, where we could probably look at opportunities that exist within there above what we're already capable of doing as humans. So in a sense, think about this as a way of not replacing our ability as humans, but to greater improve our ability of what we are able to do. And then also, coming across there, you know, the ability to turn that into actionable items. You know, I think that's probably not quite where the technology is at this point. But again, as I told you when we started this, anything I did tell you about the technology is going to be obsolete in 2 months. So who knows? 2 months, you know, maybe there are better tools on the market there for, instead of working more generalized, are working more to our specific data sets to help us do that. Let me just advance. Yeah. And then just, yeah, the last thing, I thought we'd have a little bit of fun here on this one. Dolly is OpenAI's kind of image generation tool. We did throw a prompt in there. We asked to please create a photorealistic image of what Tacoma, Washington could look like in 100 years that features Mount Rainier. A couple things will jump out at you here, especially if you're from the South Sound. You will notice that apparently in the next 100 years, the mountain is going to migrate on top of Gig Harbor. That is probably not good news for the people on the other side of the Narrows, but that's apparently what Dolly thinks is going to happen. And the other thing we would highlight is 100 years from now, apparently I-5 in Tacoma will still be under construction. So we have those going for you. With that, I think we wanted to pause. We're going to take. We're not doing questions now. I think we're doing them all at the end. But that is what I have, and I would ask Rebecca, am I just turning it over here? Is that the plan?
Yes, if you can stop sharing, we'll go on to the next.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think I'm next.
Correct.
All right.
Yes, MJ, thank you.
Okay, let's see if I can present my screen. Did it work? Do I look okay? Yeah? All right, thumbs up. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk to you guys on a little bit different of a topic. So how generative AI is changing the cybersecurity realm. As you know, I'm MJ Jensen from the city of Kirkland. And you might be wondering what happened between when this picture was taken and my face right now. And this, just like Dolly, was generative AI. So I took a picture a long time ago, what I thought was a very good picture, and they turned it into this. I personally like the original picture better, which is this picture. Great day, summer day, sunglasses on. I'm standing outside of a club and on Capitol Hill getting ready to go dancing, and I've got my red lipstick on. I thought it was better. So I'm going to talk to you guys a lot about kind of the dual nature of AI. I think that we've touched on this through Tom and Jim, and very specifically how we see that in cybersecurity. So one thing that we've made very clear here is that there has been an AI market eruption. On a global level, we're seeing the market just blow up. It's the modern day gold rush, right? Everybody wants a piece of this. It's anticipated from Allied Market Research and Exploding Topics that the generative AI global market is going to increase from 207 billion to $1.85 trillion industry by the year 2030. That's huge, right? Like, I don't even know what that's going to look like as far as the tech industry, which is already a large industry. We're also seeing a lot of increases in the healthcare industry. So we're expecting for it to increase to 187,000 by the year 2030. And then AI chips, which for those of you who don't know, an AI chip is just a chip that has a lot more computing power to handle the AI technology. And we're expecting that to increase up to 127 billion. So fun little chart here to kind of show over the next, oh gosh, it's almost 2025, really, 5 years. This is what we expect the market to do. And, you know, as you've heard, this technology, there have been a lot of unknowns, but it's getting more sophisticated every day. Some of the things that we've seen as potentials in the industry so far is that it's really impacted science. So we're hearing from biotechnology that, you know, they're trying to use generative AI to optimize metabolic pathways and to create genetic sequences, which is incredible if you think about it, and this will really speed up timelines. Same thing as far as drug discoveries go. So they're actually using generative AI to generate novel compounds. That's nuts. So that we could be using generative AI to like create drugs, and it's taking our timelines from being years down the road to months down the road. If you were to go ask Chad, which is the name I call ChatGPT, his name is Chad. If you were to go ask Chad, like, has science, like, has generative AI helped science? Just like what Tom said, Chad's going to hallucinate, and Chad's going to tell you that generative AI probably like cured some little boy named Alex's cancer. It'll come up with a story. And then if you say, hey, could you cite that source? It'll say, well, that was just an example, like, of what it could do. So the hallucinating is absolutely real. So you really definitely want to check your sources, but these are some of the real things that have potential in the AI industry. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on is climate modeling. So, as we've all, I don't know if anybody saw the second Twister, which I think is called Twisters, but I remember the original Twister, right? When they were talking about kind of figuring out how to model where tornadoes are going, and giving people like early warnings. Generative AI has the potential to possibly give people in Tornado Alley or hurricane warnings far in advance, right? So we're seeing these potentials now. And I think that it's amazing. It's a great technology, but as Jim and Tom talked about, absolutely has its risks. So you've all probably heard the term, with great risk comes great reward. Well, with great reward, which is generative AI, comes great risk. So the next thing I want to talk about is the other explosion, and that's the cyber threat explosion when it comes to generative AI. Since the onset of ChatGPT, and even actually before ChatGPT, we've seen huge increases. Since ChatGPT, so more kind of public generative AI, we've seen a 1,265 increase. And when I say we, I mean the global market, right? We've seen a 1,200% increase of AI generated phishing emails. These are malicious emails that you guys are probably sent all the time, and you forward on to your IT department, and we ask you to please not click any links and please delete the emails. It's also been reported by Mailgun and Malwarebytes that 93% of cybersecurity professionals expect for their organizations to be attacked by some kind of AI generated threat. So these are the good guys who are supposed to protect us from the bad guys, and they fully expect to be attacked. One of the reasons why is because, as we've heard, generative AI learns. And one thing that we're seeing bad actors start to do is they're starting to deploy what's called polymorphic malware. So polymorphic, if you don't know what that means in the software realm, it's basically software that can change itself, right? It morphs as it moves through, or it morphs as it learns more. So if you think about malware, it's going to morph as it moves through an environment. And that makes it hard to detect, right? Because it's anticipating where you're going to detect it, depending on what it's ran into. That's pretty scary stuff if you're an IT professional. And then the last thing, in 2022, we saw that 68% of organizations who reported cyber attacks reported that they were AI related attacks. So some kind of AI generated attack where automation was done. And that could be anywhere from, the phishing email that started the attack where somebody clicked a link was AI generated, or it could mean that, somebody impersonated somebody else, and I'm going to get to deep fakes in a second, or it could mean that the malware was AI. So we don't have numbers for what the most recent reports are. 68% was back in 2022. All those numbers are still emerging. It's just getting more sophisticated, so I can only imagine that it's just going to become more, right? I don't know why anybody would be doing it the old school way to attack people these days. That, seems a little crazy. All right, so the last thing I kind of want to talk about as far as the threats is, and I'm referring to this as a sheep in wolf's clothing, and I think Tom kind of touched on deepfakes a little bit, Jim kind of touched on deepfakes a little bit. is this whole concept of a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I've put 3 articles here, and Rebecca, if you have a chance to paste them into the chat, or if we can send these out. The first article that I'm going to talk about is regarding a deepfake identity scam where a worker in Hong Kong was basically duped into joining a video call. Rebecca, are you raising your hand?
No, sorry.
Okay.
So
It's like, do you need me to stop? They were duped into joining a video call. And on that video call, they thought that they were joining a call with some of their coworkers, people that they recognized. Like I would recognize people on this call. And it turned out that every person on that call was a deepfake recreation of their coworkers in real time. So imagine I'm not me. And I wish I could I wish I was good enough to pull out a trick and be like, hey, I'm AI. No, but that's what it was. It was, and maybe the connection was bad. So, it seemed like a little pixelated, but they expected that they were on a call with their coworkers. And during that call, the financial worker in Hong Kong, they'd received an email earlier that day that they actually thought, oh, this is a scam, right? My CEO isn't asking me to send all this money to this weird account. But on that call with their coworkers, they said, hey, actually, that email that you got from the CEO, or sorry, it was the CFO earlier, that email that you got was real and it needs to be done ASAP. And so this worker was like, oh, okay, this must be something that I wasn't aware of. And they ended up transferring the equivalent of $25 million to these fraudsters. Huge, example of how sophisticated deepfakes have become. The second example that I've put here is from the Department of Homeland Security. This is a presentation that they did in collaboration with several organizations. And really what this talks about is, it's kind of old, if I'm honest, but it kind of talks about the concept of deepfake identities. And it actually goes back to even before generative AI, right? So when people were using just pictures, video, voice cloning, things like that. But it explains the concepts and what to look for deepfake identities really well. So it's a long read, but if you are bored one day, have at it. And then the last link is an article about where a deepfake was unsuccessful. And in this particular situation, the bad actors tried to impersonate a CEO. And the CEO was the CEO of a large advertising company. They created a WhatsApp account, they created social media accounts, they created a Teams profile, and they kind of lured one of the company's executives who worked with the CEO into a meeting. During that meeting, they used publicly available YouTube video and voice cloning. So that's not very sophisticated, not as sophisticated as, say, the first example that I gave you guys. Luckily, because it wasn't so sophisticated, that executive caught on and the scam didn't go through. But that's just an example of this is kind of how they did it. The more people get their hands on these technologies, the more people can plug into those APIs, the more they're going to be able to generate content with generative AI. So luckily in that situation, they were vigilant enough to spot the scam. Unfortunately, in the most recent situation, which is the Hong Kong situation, they were not. So I think the question that everybody's going to ask themselves is how do we strike the balance, especially us as IT professionals? How do we strike the balance? Jim talked about IT in his city was reached out to about generative AI before they had developed a policy. It's very similar in Kirkland. We were reached out to first. We had people going, oh, this is going to be the next amazing thing. What do we do? And it's a little scary for IT professionals when there's a lot of unknowns. And I think that Jim really did a good job talking about some of the things that you need to have in place, because if you're going to use generative AI in your organization, you need to take a holistic approach. So you need to have policies around purchasing. You need to have policies around usage. At the City of Kirkland, in our policy, we specifically call out the differences between supportive generative AI, which is something like ChatGPT or Chat, as I like to call him, or using responsive generative AI, which is like our chat bot that we're going to be deploying onto our city website. And in the responsive generative AI, it only uses a specific set of content. It doesn't use the World Wide Web or anything openly, globally available. So that's a great thing to call out, is like there's differences that people would use this for. What are those different use cases? That's important to have in the policy. We also, just like the city of Seattle, we do make the content, or we do make the users attribute the content if the content is generally unchanged from what the generative AI came up with. So if you say, give me an outline for this presentation, and I, kind of generally use it as a guide, but I don't use it as a specific outline, we wouldn't necessarily request an attribution for that or expect an attribution for that. But if I say, rewrite this memo for me, then yeah, if I'm copying and pasting from the generative AI, you absolutely should attribute it. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Part of it is, and it's gotten better, but it is very much like a closed loop. We don't always know where it's getting this information. I've already talked about, and we've talked about it hallucinating a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're checking your sources. Anytime I prompt Chad to give me something, I always tell him to give me his sources. I say, hey, I want you to, find this information for me, but I want you to cite your sources and give me the website links to where you found this from. And sometimes Chad gives me links that go to dead ends. So I'm like, where did you get that from if you didn't even have a source website? But that's where that hallucination comes from. And then finally, I think that while it's important for us to understand that AI has had a lot of innovation in the cyber threat realm, there has also been a lot of innovation in the cyber defense realm. So just as these bad actors are using AI and generative AI to have more sophisticated attacks to get around our defenses are learning also. So we're able to generally keep up. I think the innovation that we're seeing with this technology is incredible. I don't think that we should necessarily shy away from it, but we have to approach it with a level of skepticism, right? And we have to know what we're looking at. So eyes wide open. And at the end of the day, it's going to push forward technology, which is always exciting, but also a little bit scary. So I'm happy that AI is in the world. I'm a little scared sometimes, but especially when I hear about that Hong Kong story, I'm excited to see where generative AI takes us in 10 years, as long as the robots let us live that long. And then I was gonna ask questions, but I think we're holding that till the end. And this presentation has been created with contributions from Chad. Thank you.
Thank you, MJ. I've got Jonathan next. If someone in the attendees can go ahead and ask the question in the Q&A for those articles, I can go ahead and post them. I don't have access to post the answer without someone asking the question.
Great. So my name is Jonathan Amukor. I'm a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington, where much of my practice consists of efforts to combat white supremacy. I'm from Texas, but I was originally born in Alabama. That's the state where my parents initially met. My mother immigrated to this country from Nigeria. I ended up in Louisiana, while my father ended up in Alabama. They had every intention to stay in Alabama, but couldn't find anyone to rent to them in nicer suburbs of Birmingham. They wanted to live somewhere with great schools and easy access to fresh food and access to better jobs, but were routinely rejected by landlords because of the color of their skin. They've seen vacancies advertised in papers, selecting an apartment for the home, for a tour, only to be told explicitly that Black people were not welcome in that part of town, so they left. Now, this is an example of redlining. Historically, redlining is the systemic denial of services like loans, mortgages, and other financial services to residents in certain areas because of their race. There have been numerous studies on redlining and its impact on the socioeconomic trajectories for communities of color. The practice is tied to discrepancies in the criminal legal system, the housing market, and even life expectancies. In other words, it's generally accepted that redlining has had a deleterious impact on folks of color. Now, one promise of artificial intelligence is this notion that we, as a society, can move past the racist practices that held my parents and so many other Black people of color together. The theory is that technology can be a neutral arbiter of the criminal legal system or the medical world or the housing system, but unfortunately, the application of technological advances like artificial intelligence is rarely neutral. It often reflects the biases of those who develop it. In other words, it may not be possible to extricate white supremacist ideology from technologies developed by folks who, even unwillingly, are impacted by implicit and explicit bias. Take, for example, algorithms used to screen mortgage applications or apartment rental applications. Now, there is documented evidence that these programs have disproportionately disadvantaged Black and brown people because of the data that the algorithms were built on. Oftentimes, these algorithms rely on data gathered from credit scores, criminal arrest records, and conviction histories, data that has been corrupted by the impact of white supremacy in our country. For instance, it's generally accepted that our criminal legal system is built with racial bias at every level, from who gets surveilled and policed to who gets prosecuted and convicted. More critical thoughts should be applied to something like a rental application screening program that can be employed by an algorithm. By way of illustration, I'd like to highlight a recent lawsuit out of Massachusetts. The case is called Lewis versus Safe Rent Solutions. Mary Lewis was a 54-year-old Black woman who applied for an apartment in Malden, Massachusetts, which is a town right outside of Boston. The apartment she applied for had 2 full bathrooms, an in-unit washer and dryer, and a number of other amenities that she found really appealing. And most importantly, it was in a safe neighborhood. Her application was screened by SafeRent through what they described as a, quote, rules-based tenant screening tool that calculated least performance risk factors, or a SafeRent score. What's key here is that, according to SafeRent, their algorithm automates human judgment by assigning a value of positive and negative customer application data, credit, and public record information. Now, unfortunately for Mary Lewis, her SafeRent score was low enough for her rental application to automatically be rejected. As many people can figure out, a potential tenant score and credit history, credit score and credit history do not predict whether someone will be a good tenant. While it may be a good indicator that someone will be late on a loan, or a loan of credit is not the same as a rental obligation. Moreover, the Urban Institute reports that 45% of Black consumers and 31% of Hispanic consumers have subprime credit scores in comparison to only 18% of white consumers. We know that racial disparities in credit scores not only reflect racial disparities in wealth, but they may also perpetuate this wealth inequities. Take Mary Lewis, for example. After her application was denied because of her SafeRent score, Mary provided references from 2 different landlords, as well as a reference from her employers and recent management. She even provided proof that she had paid her rent either on time or early for the last 16 years, despite her less than ideal credit history. The leasing agency told her that they couldn't overwrite the outcome of the tenant screening tool, and as a result of her application being denied by SafeRent, she ended up in a more expensive apartment that lacked the amenities she desired, and more importantly, was in a less safe neighborhood. After the lawsuit was filed, the U.S. Supreme Justice got involved, and in their letter of interest in the case, the Assistant Attorney General, Kristen Clark, wrote that, quote, housing providers and tenant screening companies that use algorithmic data to screen tenants are not absolved from liability with their practices disproportionately deny people of color access to fair housing opportunities. This denial of fair housing opportunities can be provided in a different way, algorithmic way. The same practice of redlining that forced my parents out of Alabama can now be automated by artificial intelligence. And for this reason, we should, as a society and community, employ more critical thought and oversight into how we use artificial intelligence, especially in light of the white supremacist history of this country. And just so folks know, Mary Lewis ended up winning that lawsuit. SafeRent had to pay millions of dollars to her and other members in the class action lawsuit. And if there's any questions about this topic or the case, I'm happy to talk more about it. Say where you're, oh,
You're muted.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear my audio okay? Awesome. I appreciate the thumbs up. So y'all have been listening to us talk for a little bit, and I have too. And I'm hoping we might be able to utilize the chat function to do a little bit more. So if you could answer in the chat for me sort of where your jurisdiction is in this AI journey and what you came here to learn today.
Katie, are you able to turn the chat on? We don't have the chat turned on. We just have
You can
questions.
put it in the questions. QA is fine.
Okay.
I'll give people a minute to do that while I am calling up my slide deck. Marysville, that's great. Thank you. I'm looking to learn more about where you are in your AI journey and what you're hoping to learn today, not just where your jurisdiction is. If folks are willing to disclose. And if you're not, that's okay too. I have a prepared deck. I'm happy to run through it. No AI use yet, just learning. Okay, thank you very much for that. What it is, what it does, how we can use it. That's awesome. Appreciate all the answers in the chat. What policies are already out there? Okay, that's great. I can sort of focus my remarks on some of that. Can y'all see this? No, not yet. Let me share like this. Okay, yell at me when y'all can see this or wave. Interested in if there's specific tools that agencies are using in a reliable way. Am I sharing? No. Okay. Let's try this one more time.
Starting.
It's starting. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. That's great. So I put together a slide deck that I'll just cover a little bit. And my peers, I think, did a great job of answering some of your questions. What I'm hoping to talk about as today's closer is a little bit about internal education, public engagement. I'll pick up a little bit maybe where Jim left off on policy development, identifying use cases, and then talking about partnerships. Similar to Tom, I also did an AI created image using DALL-E, and it took a while to get to something like this, I'll just say. It's my only AI created image in this presentation. I was going to do one on every slide, but decided that was a little too much robots and the glow. So I want to talk a little bit about internal engagement, and this may be especially for folks who are just getting started, as it looks like some folks in the chat maybe are, and trying to think about how do you do this work in a safe way for your jurisdiction? How do you start engaging in this conversation, no matter where you are on the org chart? So I would say you want to think about the stakeholders in this work. That's going to be one of your friends in IT. And some of you may be in IT, which is great. If you're not, you probably do want to talk to somebody in your IT department. It's probably someone in your legal department. I think it's great to loop in HR. I think it's great to loop in your city leadership. And then once you have your stakeholders aligned, and I would try to find stakeholders that are willing and excited to engage in this conversation. So it might not be everyone in IT. It might be someone in IT who's kind of willing to go out on a limb with you. I would start thinking about how you can educate each other about AI's promise and peril. And I think a lot of the speakers before me talked in great depth about the promise and the peril, and it is both. And the stakeholders do need to be thinking about what those opportunities are. Like with any big transformative project, I think from there you can align with executive sponsorship, start talking about skill building, which I've got a slide on in a minute. And then think about, and a few of the other panelists mentioned this too, think about maybe those low risk opportunities for experimentation. It is coming, it is here. You know, we're all going to have to figure out how to do this and do this equitably, I think, as Jonathan so eloquently talked about. So how do we think about dipping our toes in if we're not already dipping our toes in? And then a few of the panelists talked about getting your data house in order. Anything you do in AI is only going to be as good as the underlying data that feeds it. And for a lot of us, there is a lot of work to do to get our data kind of ready for AI. Is it accurate? Is it current? Is it classified correctly? All of these things that are going to help you build better AI models based on what public sector jurisdictions already have. And then a couple folks talked about this too. Think a lot about your city's risk tolerance and kind of what that means, what your public risk tolerance is. And I think those are great internal conversations to have at the management and leadership level and to have with your employees. After after you start having those conversations, I would definitely make sure you're thinking about training up your staff. One of the things we've done in Bellevue is invited in thought leaders. There's plenty of them in our region and across Washington State. A lot of the big AI innovation is happening here at companies that are headquartered in the Puget Sound. They are absolutely excited to come in and talk about what they're doing. And a ton of free training opportunities exist out there. I encourage people to curate, don't necessarily recreate. Good training exists. You can find it, you can share it with your staff. And it exists even in the public sector venues. Our private sector partners have great training if you want to learn their technology. I think there's publicly available and free training if you kind of want to learn concepts or dig more into what some of the speakers today have talked to you about too. I also strongly encourage public engagement. All of our communities are a little bit different. Somebody pointed out that even the different neighborhoods inside of Seattle may have different feelings about how AI is used to advance their initiatives. So I highly, highly encourage you to have that conversation very transparently with your external stakeholders too. What's the city thinking about doing, or what's your jurisdiction thinking about doing? How do you want to do it? And what are they worried about, so that you can take that into consideration as you're developing the AI policies that Jim talked about. And then, definitely consider transparency. You'll notice both Tom and I had AI generated images in our decks. We said, this is what we used. This was the prompt. I think MJ talked about that quite a bit too, with make sure you're disclosing when and how you're using it so that you can continue to earn the public's trust as you're developing out this new technology. And Jim covered some of the policy development stuff, but I would say your work should be inclusive, transparent, and aligned with community needs. I strongly encourage partnership with IT. IT needs to implement strong data privacy and security policies. MJ talked about that quite a bit. In order to ensure that your jurisdiction is protecting sensitive information. Those policies should include ethics, they should include privacy, they should include security, accountability, and to Jonathan's point, equity, and also continuous learning. A bunch of the panelists today mentioned this work is so in flight right now that it's changing all the time. So those policies need to be somewhat nimble in order to adjust to what's happening in the market. I also think it's really important to think about what kinds of risks will your jurisdiction allow. Is it zero? You know, if you want to auto translate things using generative AI in order to help a non-English speaker look at a council meeting in real time in their native language, does it have to be perfect? And those are conversations that, you know, every jurisdiction needs to have and kind of decide for their public and their policy development. I think another thing to do as you're rolling out AI in your jurisdictions is really think about what some use cases are and perhaps what some low risk use cases are. Unlike some of the partners on the call, Bellevue did roll out a public facing Gen AI chatbot last July. So July 2023. It doesn't always get it right. For example, our new city manager was appointed from interim to permanent on Tuesday night of this week. And I asked the chatbot, who's Bellevue's city manager? And it was like, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. And then I asked our chatbot, who's the mayor? And it knew immediately and provided it, you know, in real time. So we have been learning along with our chatbot vendor about how to hone that bot, how to do it better. We are transparent that it's AI, that it's a pilot, that it's probably going to get stuff wrong. But it's been out there for quite a while we kind of hone and learn with our public. And so far, people have commented, you know, certainly the public has told us what they think about it. But it's been a great experimentation for us and for our public to try to get used to options like that. Other things that other panelists talked about, you know, aiding in decision making. Jim talked about the, I think, employment one where it's not making a decision, but it may be helping to identify areas where job descriptions may need improvement. Automation is a huge one. Can it help do a task that, you know, otherwise maybe would need to be done by a human that's a low risk task? Can it be a version 1 of data analysis? Can it simulate something for people? And then can it help aid in communications? You know, can you ask it to write you a press release, and what does that press release look like? Can you ask it to draft a memo, and what does that memo look like? None of those things are ready for prime time yet, in my opinion. A couple of you already said that. I agree. But I think some of them are ready for a first draft and maybe easier than looking at a blank piece of paper, or maybe more efficient than looking at a blank piece of paper. Couple of the questions that came up in the chat when I asked for them were around where do you get some of this work? I want to talk a little bit about partnerships, and Jim mentioned some of these already, so thank you, Jim. The Gov AI Coalition is one that I am a big part of, founded out of the city of San Jose. I think we're up to 300 different governments now, and it's a bunch of government employees working together for each other to do things like, hey, here's a big master draft policy that you can just grab and make your own in your jurisdiction, but it covers most of the things you would want to cover, and it's yours for the taking. And it's been edited and it's been vetted by a bunch of government employees. And again, you can take it and make it your own. So there's a bunch of stuff like that that is free right now from the Gov AI Coalition. And those tools are things like contracting, they're things like questions you should ask, they're policies. Jim mentioned some other great organizations that are doing this kind of work. National League of Cities and ICMA both have separate kind of policy groups going on that are talking and advancing these things. And then the Center for Public Sector AI and GovTech doing similar work. And then last but not least, we've had a lot of luck with private sector partners thinking about this in partnership with local business. I know we are out of time, so I want to wrap real quick by saying the Gov AI Coalition is having a summit this December. It is designed to be entry level if that's where you are and you want to get involved in the Gov AI Coalition. You are certainly welcome to do that. If you Google Gov AI Coalition Summit, this will come up. This code will work too. And then there's not time, but for fun, I did quick takeaways as a closer from all the speakers. I didn't ask them what they wanted me to say, by the way. So these are Sabra's quick takeaways, not the actual speaker's quick takeaways. But I wanted to say we all do better when we all do better. And I think MJ said this really eloquently, like these are things that we need to think about how to advance and how to advance together. And I just want to echo some of Jonathan's and Jim's comments about we got to do it with equity and inclusion in mind. We have to do it thinking about the digital divide that already exists, and we have to do better with that work. So happy to share the slide deck with anyone who wants it. Bellevue, like many of the other jurisdictions on this call, we've engaged in 4 or 5 pilots, some public facing, some internal, with very mixed results. So also happy to share that offline. And for those of you who are still here, thanks for hanging in there until 1:32. Really appreciate your engagement today and the questions.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I did put some of those links in on the Q&A. We are out of time and I don't want to keep anyone over. I know we were originally only supposed to be an hour, so I just wanted to thank everyone and thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.